It started with a slap. A sharp, shocking crack that cut through the warm, greasy air of the all-night diner like a gunshot. It wasn't just the sound of a hand hitting a face. It was the sound of cruelty, of powerlessness, of a line being crossed that could never be uncrossed. And for the two young men in Letterman jackets who delivered it, it was the beginning of the worst night of their lives, though they were too arrogant, too puffed up on their own misplaced pride, to know it yet. Before we dive into this story of quiet strength and brutal justice, if you appreciate tales where the underdog gets their day, make sure you're subscribed. We tell stories like this every week, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The all-night diner was a relic, a bubble of chrome, red vinyl, and fluorescent light trapped in a forgotten corner of a small American town. It was a place for graveyard shift workers, for insomniacs, for truckers passing through on lonely highways. And tonight, it was the stage for a quiet, hard-working young woman named Sarah. She moved through the diner with a practiced, wary grace, her light blue uniform dress a stark contrast to the shadows pressing against the windows. She was 22, but her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held a weight that made her seem older. She refilled coffee cups with a soft, "Thank you, hon," and wiped down counters with a quiet efficiency that spoke of long hours and little thanks. She was the kind of person who faded into the background, a portrait of gentle resilience that most people took for granted. And then there were Chad and Brett. They swaggered in just after 10 p.m., a blast of cold air and obnoxious laughter preceding them. Their high school Letterman jackets, emblazoned with a proud B for the Bulldogs, were a testament to a glory days that were, for them, rapidly receding into the past. They were college freshmen now, home for the weekend, but they still carried themselves like the kings of the high school hallways. They slammed into a corner booth, their voices too loud, their presence an intrusion. They were the storm cloud that had finally broken inside the diner's warm refuge. They immediately started in on Ray, the elderly, stoop-shouldered short order cook, yelling their complex, ridiculous food orders through the service window, laughing when he struggled to keep up. They made snide comments about a young couple trying to have a quiet conversation, causing the girl to blush and look down at her plate. But their main target, the one who offered the least resistance and therefore the most appeal, was Sarah. From the moment she approached their table, order pad in hand, they began. "Well, hello there, sweetheart," Chad, the larger of the two, drawled, his eyes roaming over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You new around here. Don't think I've seen a pretty little thing like you slinging hash before." Sarah kept her gaze fixed on her pad. "What can I get for you gentlemen?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Brett snickered. "Gentlemen. Hear that, Chad? She thinks we're gentlemen." Their order was a deliberate mess. A burger with everything, but hold the pickles, the onions, the mayo, and the bun, well done but not dry, fries extra crispy but not burnt. They changed their minds 3 times, just to watch her scribble and erase a small, cruel game for their amusement. She endured it. She brought their drinks, and Chad accidentally knocked his glass of ice water onto the floor, the shattering glass making her jump. "Whoops, clumsy me," he said with a smirk that held no apology. "You gonna clean that up, sweetheart?" Sarah didn't speak. She just knelt, gathering the sharp, wet shards with trembling hands, the cold water soaking into the knees of her uniform. The other patrons looked away, a collective shame hanging in the air. They were witnesses to an injustice, but fear, or perhaps apathy, kept them silent. Ray the cook glared from his window, his gnarled hands clenched into fists, but he was 70 years old and weighed 130 pounds soaking wet. There was nothing he could do. The real torment began when their food arrived. Chad took one bite of his deconstructed burger and spat it back onto the plate. "This is cold," he announced, his voice booming. And I said, "Well done. This is pink. You serving me garbage, sweetheart?" Sarah, her face pale, stammered, "I can have Ray make you another one." "You bet you will," Brett chimed in, shoving his plate forward. "And these fries are soggy. You think we pay good money to eat this slop?" Sarah reached for the plates, her movements slow and defeated. But as her fingers brushed Chad's plate, he grabbed her wrist. His grip was tight, his knuckles white. The diner fell silent. The only sound was the low hum of the neon sign outside and the frantic sizzle from the grill. "You know," Chad said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, "I don't think you're sorry at all. I think you're a lousy waitress with a lousy attitude. I think you need to learn some respect. Sarah tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. Please, she whispered, her eyes pleading. Please let me go. Please, that did it. That single word of submission seemed to inflate Chad's ego to its breaking point. He released her wrist with a shove that sent her stumbling back. You heard the lady, he sneered to Brett. She said please, and then he stood up. The vinyl booth creaked in relief. He took a step toward Sarah, who was now backed against the counter, her hands raised defensively. The other patrons were frozen, a tableau of horror. This was no longer just harassment, this was a physical threat. And then, with a contemptuous smirk, Chad drew back his hand and slapped her across the face. The sound was unimaginably loud. It wasn't a playful tap, it was a full-force, open-handed blow that snapped her head to the side and sent a spray of saliva into the air. A bright red handprint bloomed on her cheek. Sarah let out a small, choked cry, more of shock than pain, her hands flying to her stinging face. Tears, hot and immediate, welled in her eyes. In that moment, she looked impossibly young and broken. The world in the diner seemed to stop. The coffee stopped brewing. The clock on the wall stopped ticking. Everyone was holding their breath, suspended in a moment of pure, unadulterated wrongness. Chad stood over her, chest puffed out, a conqueror. That's for your attitude, he hissed, and that is precisely when the bell above the diner door jingled. The sound was so ordinary, so out of place in the aftermath of the violence, that every single head in the diner turned toward it. The door swung open, letting in a gust of wind and rain, and a man stepped inside. He was tall and broad-shouldered, silhouetted against the stormy night. He moved with an unnerving stillness, a predator's economy of motion. He wasn't just walking, he was occupying space, his presence immediately recalibrating the gravity in the room. He wore digital desert camouflage fatigues, the fabric dusty and worn, and a large, military-issue duffel bag was slung over his shoulder. His hair was cropped short, his jaw was set like granite, and his eyes, a pale, icy blue, scanned the room in a single sweeping, analytical glance that missed nothing. He took in the scene with the speed of a supercomputer, the terrified patrons, the smug bullies standing over a cowering figure, and then his gaze landed on Sarah, still holding her face, tears streaming down her reddened cheek. And in that instant, the stone-faced mask of the soldier cracked. A flicker of something raw and dangerous passed through his eyes, a storm of recognition, protectiveness, and a cold, focused rage. Behind him, a large German shepherd, its coat wet and dark, padded silently into the diner. The dog sat immediately at his heel, its intelligent eyes also fixed on the scene, a low, guttural growl rumbling in its chest that was more felt than heard. Chad and Brett, their bravado momentarily punctured by the sudden entrance, recovered quickly. This was just